When you say that what constrains your theory choice is whether or not you can get this theory to work, I'm wondering whether you mean, let's just take panpsychism, for example. You're saying that for panpsychism to work means that you can tell a story that you find compelling and explanatory for how it accounts for human consciousness, or you're saying that, and this gets us back to computer science, you don't know how to use panpsychism to program an AGI that is conscious.
So how would you formalize panpsychism? And you actually spell it out. What is the relationship between observables, the structure that realizes the observables, and, for instance, the phenomenology of consciousness that you want to explain? How do they relate to each other? And I find that a lot of panpsychists are unable to spell this out in a way that is satisfying, that basically makes sense, or spell it out in a way that makes it different from, say, computationalist functionalism. And maybe take a step back and explain what computationalist functionalism means, right? So first of all, functionalism is an epistemological position. Epistemology means our theory on what can we know about reality and how do we access to what we know. And in functionalism, the idea is that we construct objects based on behavior. So for instance, we construct the idea of a water molecule based on the behavior of a certain aspect of physical reality that is in some sense invariant, right? So we notice that we can split the water molecule. We notice that we can combine many water molecules into a liquid that is water, and we can explain water by being a combination of these molecules at certain temperatures and so on, right? And so this is all behavior. Never do we get in contact with the essence of a water molecule, with something that is beyond observable behavior. So everything that we construct as a water molecule is the result of us trying to regularize and abstract all our observations related to that phenomenon, right? And so the idea that it's explainable by this particular singular phenomenon and so on makes sense from the perspective of functionalism, because the water molecule is describing a set of functions that can be that lead to interactions with other changes in other information in the world, right? Mm-hmm. It would also not make sense from this perspective to say that there is an object in physics that is behaving in every single way like a water molecule, that shares exactly all the properties of a water molecule in every regard, in every possible measurement that can be made, but it's different from a water molecule, right? Because we never got to the idea of a water molecule from something else but behavior that we observe, right? And so there is this idea, the alternative to functionalism would be some kind of essentialism, that there is some hidden essence that yet makes itself known to us in some way beyond behavior. And I don't know how that would work. Mm-hmm. Right? Otherwise, if it's observable behavior, again, it would be a property that we observe that would be translated in some function. Mm-hmm. And the other one is computationalism, the other aspect, and that's a position about representation. It basically says that we can represent an arbitrary thing or model an arbitrary thing using state transitions. And to say that there are things that cannot be modeled by state transitions doesn't sound absurd, but it's a very bold statement, because it means that physicists are missing something, or everybody is missing something who is making models. So what should that be? And so I think that this position of computationalist functionalism is a relatively basic idea about how representation works and how epistemology works, how objects are constructed and knowledge is constructed over those objects. And so when we are trying to attack this position and somebody says, I'm going to build a non-functionalist theory of consciousness, I am very curious. Mm-hmm. And for instance, Giulio Tononi is trying to do this in IIT. But IIT is trying to describe consciousness using information theoretical regularities, which means functions. And this is difficult, right? Because at which point is he able to introduce something in his theory that is not functionalist, mm-hmm. and yet is somehow a notion that you can work with as a philosopher or as a scientist? And so it seems to me this belief in essences that do not reveal themselves, yet we know about them, seems to be a superstition. It seems to build on some kind of intuition that I construct in my mind, but when I closely examine the intuition, I notice that it's empty, that there is no way in which I can build something that is realizing some kind of formal difference between that intuition and another system. So when somebody is saying, a panpsychist, and they say that, for instance, consciousness is an aspect of matter that is distributed in the universe and it's everywhere in the universe, right? You would probably, if you ask this person, does this mean that everything in the universe is equally conscious? It's probably not what you want to get out of this, right? There seems to be some kind of difference in the phenomenology between a person that is anesthetized and a person that is not, or a person that is dead and a person that is not, or the empty space between people. Right? So even if there is something going on in the empty space between people, it's to some degree different than what's happening inside of your organism, especially your brain, with respect to consciousness. So you have to explain this somehow, right? So, but if you have a form of panpsychism where you say, okay, but it depends on the structural properties of the matter, and only when you have a certain density of certain structural properties and so on, then you could say that what is the seed of software in the world? And it's everywhere in the world. But it's implemented to a different degree depending on the functional structure of things that are enacting it, right? And so the more you are looking into this, as soon as you then identify criteria for when the structure exists, like control systems, energy consumption, and so on, stability of a substrate, and so on, the more you add to this, the more your panpsychist theory turns into box standard functionalism, right? And unless you make a radical step and say, all your observations have actually nothing to do with consciousness. The fact that you are behaving differently when you get anesthetized or when your brain gets destroyed is completely irrelevant to consciousness, because consciousness is something that's much more fundamental than this. Right? But then we are not talking about the same phenomenon anymore. We are talking about your idea of something fundamental that can no longer be mapped into what I observe and what I try to make sense of.